Welcome to Name Takes, a podcast about the cultures of naming, from the names of streets to buildings to people and beyond. What are the stories behind certain names? And what causes do specific names promote? Where can the roots of one name or other be found? Could these be invented? In Name Takes, we include artists' voices and cases from the art field. Because in art, meaning-making is central. And most of all, because art helps us formulate better questions about the present.
Hello, thank you for listening. I'm pleased to introduce you to episode 7 of Name Takes. My name is Sofía Hernández Chong Cuy, and I've developed this episode in collaboration with Sarah Demeuse and Mary Wang. Sarah is originally from Belgium and Mary from the Netherlands, but they happen to be living in New York. Maybe I should mention, I'm originally from Mexico and live in Rotterdam. Now, on to the matter at hand. We have been following different cases of naming, renaming, and unnaming arts institutions. In 2022, curator and writer Sarah Demeuse interviewed artist Shevaun Wright for Name Takes. In this episode, they discuss the artist's work which tackles a building's name at her university. Shevaun's story is amazing, connecting a manuscript from Leonardo da Vinci to charter schools' gentrification and the concept of art washing. Sarah called Shevaun from New York, and Shevaun took the call from Los Angeles, California, where she lives.
What I'm interested in talking to you about is your thesis, which I know it was called Class Action, and it deals with naming of a university gallery at UCLA in Los Angeles. I was wondering if you could tell me what that project was actually comprised of, like what were the basic building blocks and in what year did you start working on this?
So I started working on Class Action in the year before my thesis was due, which was 2018. It developed in a very gradual way. Initially, it really just began as very general investigation into the site where my thesis would be presented, which was the new White Gallery at UCLA. So I decided to really interrogate that space. And in doing so, I guess I started to look into the renovation of the space and the naming and donor that was involved, which was Eli Broad. In carrying out my research, I did come across an article that actually had evidence that he had attempted to embezzle money from a nonprofit that was managed by our art school. And so from there, the project really took momentum under a claim regarding that particular action.
So you're looking at a gallery that is named after Eli Broad within a larger school that is then part of UCLA? Like, what are all of the levels there?
In 1994, there was an earthquake that significantly damaged the art school, at which point Eli Broad pledged some money to the school and wanted in exchange for that pledge for the art school to be named after him, which it eventually was. It was renamed the Broad Art Centre. The new White Gallery was actually a new space that was created by those renovations. So it's really dealing with the institution of UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, the institution of the Hammer Museum, which was then under I think it was a 99-year management contract to be managed by UCLA, and its interaction with a donor being Eli Broad, and the choice to name its art school after Eli Broad. Eli and Edith Broad, his wife.
Right. And Eli Broad was a contractor, a developer. How would you describe him?
Yeah, he is one of the few individuals to have had 2 Fortune 500 companies in different sectors. The first one being construction. He was a tract house builder, a very successful one. And then his second major venture was into insurance. So I think he was valued at the time I was doing my research at $7.6 billion, or his personal wealth was estimated at that.
And so he was involved with the Hammer Museum prior to the earthquake, and then the naming of the school happened as the building was being renovated.
Yeah, so I believe he was asked to join the board of trustees for the Hammer, and he was sitting on the board, I know, in 1998, which was the date at which the events that I unpacked occurred. And yes, the decision to name the building after Eli and Edith occurred in 2000, and then the actual naming happened once the renovations were complete in 2006.
That's so interesting that actually 6 years pass between a decision and then actually a plaque going up. So you basically started that research when you were there in 2019. So you were a master's student at UCLA?
So yeah, I was an MFA student while I was creating this work. And, you know, I had passed through, I had gone to classes, I had occupied the space of the Broad Centre for a long time. I'd gone past those plaques. And Broad, looms large as a figure in LA. He has his own museum here and is also on many plaques around the city, like Mocha and LACMA. So I was just always very aware of his name as someone who was significant.
And then when you learn more about him, how did that impact you?
I guess I was a little outraged. The source material that I came across that actually had interviews and identified Eli Broad's attempted embezzlement of money from the Hammer happened in 2010, and it was published in The New Yorker by Connie Brook. And I think I was most surprised that that was such a well-known fact, and yet it hadn't at all impacted upon the landscape of our art school, which, it was one of the best art schools in America, and is very highly regarded in the world as well, and produces significant artists and has a lot of very valuable discussions, particularly around institutional critique. That was the thing that really sort of stuck with me. And this idea of, one of my teachers, while I was there, Barbara Kruger, has a very large mural downtown, and it says, "Who is above the law?" And it occurred to me that, there are people that believe they are above the law. And it really got me on kind of a track of critically evaluating like what role the arts have in putting people above the law and in laundering mythology and reputations.
A few words in what you said really it called my attention. First of all, you said that the name on the school actually promoted him, and I think it would be great that you describe it a bit more. Also, the question of laundering would be great if you could unpack how a name on an art school can do that.
I did a little bit of research into the psychology of naming, is that they have found that the more you see a name and the more familiar you become with a brand name, which is essentially what Broad has become in LA, and outside of LA as well. You know, he doesn't donate money without a brand, and that's the Broad Foundation. And when you start to see this pattern repeated and repeated and repeated, what they say in the psychology of naming is that you start to feel these feelings of love and affection for that brand. And in terms of the laundering, traditionally you would use laundering in terms of money laundering, and that's not how I mean it. I mean it in terms of reputational laundering, which is where you can make large sums of money, such as the Sacklers, and effectively launder your reputation or any questions around how that money was made through donating to the arts. You become sort of the savior or the generous benefactor. Carol Duncan talks about the donor memorial, which is this idea of like creating effectively a shrine to yourself, so that you will be remembered in a positive light throughout the ages. And what better way to do it through art, which is also a fairly timeless medium in many ways, or something that is preserved as a record of our times.
I wanted to go back to the question of the student within this. I think I was struck by the fact, indeed, of this psychological question. I think you mentioned anger at a few points, and I really would love for you to talk a bit more of how a name can do that, how it reaches under the skin too, so to say, on like a cellular level.
There isn't sort of a wealth of studies on the psychology of naming, but there are enough that indicate, you know, that there is a very strong relationship between even how you are named as a child and the sort of life that you might go on to lead or the jobs that you might obtain. And it applies equally at an institutional level. And yes, names very much do get under the skin.
You engage in a very specific legal area where you write documents, filing what I would call a claim. You probably have better language. Can you talk more about that step that you decided to take as part of your project?
Yeah. In terms of the legal argument, what I kind of constructed was first of all a class action, because a class action is generally numerous. So, over 20 claimants that have, a common issue of fact or law, and that there, is a class representative that's capable of representing their claims. I chose that medium or that avenue because so many students have passed through since 2006 when the building was named, and they've all been affected by this decision. And then that kind of brings me also to the claim, which is that all of the students that have come through have also contributed to the restitution reclaim that I made, and restitution is really about, it's an equitable claim, and it's about the amount that you can claim is reflected by the amount that the defendant has wrongfully gained as a result of their actions. So rather than necessarily proving that the naming of the building has cost me anything, which arguably it hasn't cost me anything. So although there wasn't necessarily a concrete economic loss, there definitely was, in my opinion, an economic gain that was quite significant for Eli Broad in having his goodwill and reputation bolstered by the student body of this art school and the institution itself. So the way I constructed the claim, which, was equally symbolic and real, was to seek restitution from Eli for his mobilization and use of the student body to improve his reputation and goodwill.
And is that something that you put a number on, or would that have to have been decided through the procedures?
It would have had to be decided through the procedures, so it was rather speculative. The first step in bringing a claim is usually sending a letter of demand, and I did that, and I served it on Eli through a process server. That letter had a few requests. One was that he voluntarily remove his name from the buildings, and secondly, that he donate a certain amount of money. I believe I set the figure at $1 million to a women's organisation, particularly dealing with homelessness in LA. And that choice was the organisations that I listed that he might be able to donate to. I believe when I wrote to him, I footnoted the nominal figure as a very tiny fraction of the tax he would have paid on his art collection.
You also wrote a letter to the school, didn't you, to UCLA?
I did. I wrote to the president, and I in particular focused on the issue of public trust and following the university's own policies in terms of naming. And, the incident that all of this revolves around is, I probably should spell it out, the Hammer Museum in 1998 de-accessioned probably Ahmad Hammer's, who had just passed, favourite or most beloved possession that he donated to that non-profit, and that was a Leonardo da Vinci manuscript. It was de-accessioned and sold to Bill Gates for around, I think, $30 million. And Eli was sitting on the board of trustees at the time and felt that he had shepherded the sale of that work, that he was owed some kind of cut from it. And he had pledged $20 million to the renovation of our UCLA art school at that time, and basically earmarked $10 million of the money that was then held in trust by this nonprofit at the Hammer as his own, and he was going to take that money and donate it to UCLA under his own name. That would be considered embezzlement, and also a breach of fiduciary duties and a whole other range of obligations as a trustee for the museum. And so my letter to the university focused more on this, attempted embezzlement, and also Eli Broad's significant history in LA in the movement for more charter schools, which is a form of private education, and that, removes a lot of funding from the public school system, and how that runs counter to the values of UCLA and an actual research that has been conducted in UCLA regarding the effects of this privatization on racial dynamics and, opportunities down the road for kids. So, yeah, I really focused on writing to the president asking for a review of the policies and whether or not they were followed in the first place. And on the other hand, asking them, well, even if you did take this act of naming or the building after Eli Broad, given the information that we now have about his attempted embezzlement and the involvement of the school in this, it would seem prudent to rethink the presence of Eli Broad's name in the art school.
And in what way have they taken that forward, or how have they responded to these demands?
They haven't responded at all to any of my letters. Eli Broad, well, he passed away recently, but he never responded either during his life.
Now, what happened after you graduated? How did you carry this forward? You just told me Eli recently passed. Where is all of this standing now?
At this point in time, I have written several times to the president of the University of California. I've not had any response, so I'm starting to explore other means of taking the project forward, including legal and also some activism on campus, including petitions. And I'm working with a student to kind of get that going in a more coordinated way. But yeah, there's a long way to go. The way that buildings are named and the sort of accountability that university institutions have, and also the transparency of how these donations come about, what bargains are struck, what is the paperwork, what are the contracts, what are the terms of the gift. It's all information that's very difficult to get your hands on. And yeah, it is, as a former student and even as students that are going there now, it's just an interesting exercise to look at the challenges to actually making universities accountable for following their own policies and procedures. So yeah, I'm still working on this project. I still feel very strongly about it.
I obviously wanted to ask you about that other road that you haven't really taken yet. Public protests, sit-ins, the Sacklers is a great example, or rather Nan Golden's actions. And then also open letters.
I very much look to Nan Golden and Payne's and protests by the Guerrilla Girls and other protests at the Whitney as a potential model for drawing attention to these issues and then also making larger questions across the board about the role of philanthropy in the arts and the sort of mechanisms that happen behind the scenes.
I can't help but wonder, is there a way of getting out of that logic of just, museums depend more and more on gifts. Only certain people can give these. Then there are plaques and names from water coolers to entire buildings. I wonder how you see this.
I certainly don't have any concrete answers at this point. I know that we're sort of in a phase now where there's a lot of consciousness raising around these issues, and what has traditionally been a fairly polished face of the museum and the act of donation is now really being called into question. And my friend Nizan Shaked has just written a book about museums, wealth and philanthropy. So I do see that there is potential for change.
before I let you go, what can you tell me about your name, Shevaun Wright?
Okay, so Shevaun, I was named in the womb, and I was named after a neighbour. And Shevaun is an Irish name, which is quite common in Australia now, and it's spelled Siobhan. And my father's mother, my grandmother, who was a brilliant woman and was awarded her PhD posthumously, every time she wrote to my mother, she spelt my name differently. And so my mum was like, okay, we're just going to spell it phonetically now. So it's spelled Shevaun. I'm not sure what it means, but I do know that ever since Shevaun has become more common as a name in Australia, I've been told several times that I spell my own name wrong. And yes, I'm also aware too that my last name was the result of a name change by, I think it was my great-grandfather. So yeah, there is a lot to a name. And as I understand it, we changed from something that was a lot more Scottish to then Wright. So who knows, maybe, but yeah, there is something to a name, that's for sure.
Thank you for listening. Name Takes is a podcast produced by Kunstinstituut Melly in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Sarah Demeuse and Mary Wang conducted the artist interviews in episodes 5 to 10 of Name Takes. Each of these episodes is introduced by Sofía Hernández Chong Cuy. Judith Scholz is the voice talent of the original music. The podcast sound, mixing and original music, has been developed by Jan Pohl at Okapi Recordings in Rotterdam. The audio files were mastered by Masterenzo Mastering. Production management was overseen by Wendy van Slagmaat Bos and communication and marketing by Jeroen Lavèn. The graphic design of Name Takes is by Wooseok Jang from Orange Slice Type, who participated in CLIP, an arts education program of Kunstinstituut Melly. This episode was realized thanks to a grant from the Prins Bernhard Fund. Name Takes has also been realized thanks to a grant from a donor who wishes to remain unnamed. Kunstinstituut Melly thanks them for their support and also gives special thanks to the participating artists for sharing their experiences, projects and insights to listeners of Name Takes.